right? And so then those osteoblasts basically just keep growing out, keep depositing bone matrix material with the calcium. Well, I'm sorry, not yet. Depositing bone matrix material. But that's the ossification center, just the simple process of osteoprogenitor cells differentiating into osteoblasts. Okay, and so then after that, what you're going to have is calcification occur. So that's why I said not yet, because second step of intramembranous ossification is when now these osteoblasts now deposit this calcium into the bone matrix. And so that's what's very interesting, what's happening next, which we knew would happen, right? That's what bone material, that type of connective tissue, is distinguished from other types based on the calcium that's deposited, right? And then third is that what we have is trabeculae formation. And all trabeculae is the material, what we consider spongy bone, okay? Spongy bone. So spongy bone, the softer type, versus compact. The compact bone is much harder. That's that brick-like material we've been talking about. The only difference, it's not like it has less calcium in it, the trabeculae, it's just that. It deposit of the actual collagen and the formation of it. The irregular arrangement of the collagen creates spaces, and now that means the material is not as hard. So that's why trabeculae is more softer. That's what we consider spongy bone. Always at the center of bone. All of your 206 bones have spongy bone at the center of it, okay? Just like the sandwich analogy that I gave in class. Your meat in the middle, that's soft, but your bread around it, hard. Okay, the compact bone is always surrounding the spongy, right? So that's what's happening in third step of intramembranous ossification, trabeculae formation. All right, and then what happens is that we get our what? Pieces of bread to surround our meat. At the end, we have our surrounding, which is the periosteum form. There are two different portions of a periosteum. The more inner portion is the compact bone. And so that's what's going to finish up. And then after around that, well, we're going to have some dense irregular connective tissue around that, which is called a fibrous pericardium. Fibrous periosteum. So that's what finishes up the bone. And that's what we have, only 4 steps as it relates to what we call intramembranous ossification. Okay, and that's how your flat bones are formed. And a lot of bones in the axial skeleton there. Okay, so it's pretty simple there. Just 4 steps. Versus when we look at endochondral ossification, we're going to have a little bit more steps. And if we could tell from the name here, endochondral, we have the word chondra in there, which indicates we're talking about some cartilage in this story as well. Yes. And so that's what's going to happen with endochondral. We'll start to form bone. We have to start with cartilage. And that's what starts first. Number 1, we start what we call a cartilage model. Okay. So we have a cartilage model in the beginning. So we're talking about what are most of the bones that are formed for endochondral ossification? It's the appendicular skeleton. All right, and so like if we take a bone from appendicular skeleton, like your humerus starts out as cartilage. Yes, if there was an image done of the fetus during endochondral ossification, in that first step, you saw the humerus, it's just cartilage basically. All right. And we talked about how there isn't much of a difference between cartilage and bone. The same amount of collagen, that's the case. It's the same amount of collagen. So we still have, when we're looking at cartilage and bone, really hard type of material. It's just that there's a difference between the consistency of cartilage like plastic versus bone like brick. And what makes the bone harder, that brick, is calcium, the mineral deposit. Your cartilage doesn't have any mineral deposit. So your humerus at this stage, no calcium in it, right? But it looks just like a humerus. It's just cartilage, right? So this is what it starts out to be. Now, when you go to your second step, it's what you would think. You have your cartilage model, what cells make up cartilage like we talked about? Chondrocytes, right? Or if you will, chondroblasts, right? Not osteoblasts, chondroblasts. And they continue to make this cartilage, right? And so that's what just happens next. The second step is just what? Cartilage growth. cartilage growth. And, right, that makes total sense, right, as it relates to, you know, just this humerus, a model of a humerus now continues just to grow, all right? So that humerus just grows a little longer there, all right? And so that's the second step. Now, third step, which is very interesting, okay, which we figured would happen is because we're talking about bone growth, is that toward the end of cartilage growth, we had some, on the outer portion of this cartilage model, we had some osteoprogenitor cells get into the picture, right? And some osteoblasts as well come as a result of them as well. And then we start to have some what deposited? Some calcium deposited. So which at the end of cartilage growth, we have some cartilage, if you will, being filled now with what? With calcium. That's a big problem now for your for your actual cartilage material or your chondrocytes, because don't forget, right? Chondrocytes, they don't reach out and grab each other just like the osteoblasts do, like I talked about in the previous videos, where they form canaliculi. Osteoblasts, they form canaliculi. Now your osteocytes have canaliculi between them. That's not the case with chondrocytes, and so therefore, the chondrocytes can't get their oxygen and nutrients by way of diffusion anymore, because once calcium is deposited, it's no way for oxygen and nutrients to diffuse through that material. So they die off. So chondrocytes start to die off in this cartilage material at the end of your cartilage growth stage, second stage there of endochondral ossification. They die off, but that's okay, because who comes to the rescue? Well, when we look at third step, we see. Because what's going to happen is that on third step, we get a primary ossification center. Okay? And that sounds a lot similar to what we had with first stage of intramembranous ossification, which is an ossification center form. And so simply, what is it? It's simply osteoprogenitor cells differentiating into osteoblasts. Same thing we have here. We have osteoprogenitor cells differentiating in osteoblasts at a larger scale now as it relates to these phases. And now you have that conglomerate mass of all that's happening at the center of this bone here. And then what happens? Boom. You have your osteoblasts constantly now making this bone material, filling in the spaces where chondrocytes were. They're all dead now. So you have osteoblasts filling in those spaces and filling in bone matrix material. So this is wonderful now. Now we have bone formed from cartilage. And that's what's happening at step 3. All right. However, let's remind ourselves that how are they growing? They're growing in a lengthwise manner, right? So yes, your humerus is filling up with this bone in a lengthwise manner. All right. That makes total sense, though, as you know, your long bones get longer, right? So yes, we have interstitial growth occurring here. That's what that's called, interstitial growth. Okay. So primary ossification center is going to be responsible for interstitial growth. All right. And then what we're going to do is at step 4, something very interesting is going to happen based on the cell I talked about earlier, which is osteoclast. Okay, so your osteoclast at the center of bone, this type of long bone, is just going to eat away a little bit more than what your osteoblasts are doing in the center there. So that means they create a cavity. All right, so what's going to form at 4th step is what we call a medullary cavity. Okay, all right. And then in step 5, what we're going to have form is a secondary ossification center. So in step 5, we're going to have a secondary ossification center form. Okay. Secondary ossification center is basically just a whole bunch of what? Osteoprogenitor cells, conglomerate mass of it, differentiating into osteoblasts. But where now? Not at the center of a long bone, but at the ends of it, right? And then what's going to happen is that we're going to have what we call outward growth of bone. And that's why at the end of long bones, you have these knobs. All right, so secondary ossification centers are responsible for the knobs you have at the ends of bones. It's not interstitial growth happening there. It's what we call appositional growth Appositional growth just means outward growth. Outward growth. All right? And then what we're going to have after that, which is the last step, is some cartilage forming over that, which is articular cartilage. Okay? And that's what we're going to have for step 6. Articular cartilage is going to form around the ends of long bones, over covering it. So what's at the cover of the end of long bones? It's articular cartilage. Articular cartilage, okay? And then what we're also going to have at the end of long bones, okay, right between the actual diaphysis and, if you will, the epiphysis, right in the metaphysis, if you will, is what we consider the epiphyseal plate, okay? It's called the epiphyseal plate. And that is at the start of birth, where we're now going to have interstitial growth continuing for long bones. And that's how you get taller. Okay, very good.